Emperor Hirohito's death in January of 1989 was I think one of the most important occasions in post-war Japanese history. And I happened to be in Japan for the preceding 4 months, and pretty much 8 months after that. So it was a very precious opportunity to witness that moment. And as he lay dying, it was a very important period for the Japanese people to suddenly engage in an intense and pervasive reflection on what the war period had been. And many, many people wrote publicly and otherwise, media people reflecting on what either they themselves had done or what they had heard from their predecessors as seniors about how they had collaborated in putting forth an account of the war that was only favorable, that did not give a hint to the Japanese public about how their side was surely and massively and tragically being defeated. So media people reflecting on their war responsibility, school teachers reflecting on their responsibility and their collusion with the state in allowing their students to be mobilized by the war, those old enough to be conscripted and those young enough to be conscripted on the home front for factory work or farm work and so forth and so on. Their collusion in abiding by the state and producing emperor-centered statist ideology about the holy war that Japan was engaged in. Parents reflecting on what they had told their children. So there was a massive, I think, historic reflection on the failure to have engaged in historic reflection, but that also brought out interesting things about how immediately after the war, even in the parliament, there was a resolution passed of regret and atonement for what the Japanese army had done in Asia. So very early on, there was a kind of consciousness which everyone widely thinks the Japanese never engaged in, which was lost. There was I interviewed the mayor of Nagasaki, who was subsequently shot by a right-winger for saying in the city assembly, when he was asked in the period when the emperor was dying, he was asked, do you think this emperor bore any responsibility for Japan's role in World War II? And he said, from what I know of Japanese history, I have to say that yes, the emperor had some responsibility. Whereupon right-wing sound trucks invaded that city, and a year later he was shot through the lungs. He fortunately survived. And he was a conservative politician, but he said, I have always said, he was a leader in a local flag, rising sun flag, and praise to the emperor anthem. And he said, I have always said to those people when I've been asked to speak to them that we Japanese were mourning at the end of the war. We paid a very dear price. But I've always said to those people, think about Chinese women, Chinese sisters and mothers and lovers. Think about Americans. They are mourning their loved ones every bit as much as we are. So if we love our country, he presents himself as a patriot. If we love our country, we have to acknowledge the love that our former enemies had for their country and their sense of grief over their loved ones. So all of this reflection has existed, but was suppressed often for a long period, I think, and came back to life during the period when the emperor was dying.